Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. Mishnah Yomi is continuing in the third parak of Maaser Sheni, Mishnah 12. Hamashil konkonim Maaser Sheni. A man lends out his containers. These konkonim are sort of a jug or a small barrel that we're going to see could be sealed up, and his fellow is going to put Maaser Sheni into them. Afal pi shegofon, even though he sealed them. Now, this word gafan here is not geffen. Geffen is, of course, wine, grape juice, but gafan means put a lid on it. There's a modern word in Ivrit. Gapa is the upper part of the shoe. This word could be cognate to gav, which means the back. So it's something like putting a lid on it. So even though he already put a lid on it, lo kana Maaser. The kalim do not become Maaser. Now, what's going on here is we learned before that if you're buying an animal for Maaser Sheni, the skin could be included. The skin could get the Maaser Sheni. So here, if we're putting wine into these kankanim, into these containers, and sealing them with the Maaser Sheni inside, we thought perhaps they would become Maaser Sheni themselves. And then the issue is, if he goes to redeem this Maaser Sheni wine onto kesef, onto coins, he might have to pay for the container also if it's now one unit or considered batel, nullified to the Maaser Sheni wine inside. So this first part of the Mishnah is saying he poured Maaser Sheni wine into the containers, even though he put the lid on it, sealed it closed. The containers are not batel to the Maaser Sheni wine. And if he redeems it, he's only paying for the wine inside, not the container. But the Mishnah continues, Zolaf l'toich stam. He just poured in chulin wine. Ad shelo gafan. He hasn't put a lid on it yet. Lo kana Maaser. And then he calls this wine Maaser. So he's designating his tithes. He pours his chulin wine, his tevel wine, really, in and designates Maaser. If there's no lid on it, the container is not batel. But mishe gafan, once he's put the lid on it, kana Maaser. Puts the lid on first, and then designates this container as Maaser Sheni for the rest of the batch of wine. So then Maaser Sheni owns the container also, in the sense that, again, if he needs to redeem it, he has to pay for the container also, kind of like we saw redeeming an animal would have to pay for the skin, which is sort of the container for the meat. The Mishnah continues talking about a case of these barrels regarding bitzel, nullification, that we discussed extensively in Trumot. Ad shelo gafan, if he hasn't put the lid on yet, olot be'echad v'meya, then if one container of truma is in there, it's going to be batel in 101. So again, if you have one part of truma falling into 100 parts of chulin, so we say it's batel in 101. You have 101 parts total, and one of them is truma, so it's batel. They would take out one of these parts and give it to a kohen, but the rest of it was edible for non-kohanim. But the Mishnah says, mishe gofon, once he's put a lid on it, mekadshot b'chol shehen. So what's going on is he has one sealed container of truma, and it gets mixed up in the wine cellar with 100 or even 200, even 1,000 containers of chulin. Now he's got a problem, because a sealed container is considered hashuv. It's very important, and because of that, it's not batel. The Mishnah concludes on this topic, ad shelo gafan, if he has not put the lid on it yet, his barrels, his containers are open, torem me'achat ala kol. He can take truma from one container onto the rest of them. Because they're all open, they're considered mina mukaf, something we discussed by truma. Remember, we talked about by taking challah. You want to take challah from a dough that's close together, not from far apart. It's called taking mafresh min hamukaf. So with the lids off, it's considered all kind of together, even though they're in separate kelim. Mishe gofon, once he's put the lid on it, torah mikol achat v'achat. He now has to take truma separately from each container, because once the lid's on, they're considered separate. On to Mishnah Yud Gimel. Now, the Rambam learns this Mishnah as just people are selling wine in containers, or Maaser Sheni wine in Yerushalayim. The Bartanura learns up that he wants to take truma. It's sort of a continuation of what we just discussed in the last Mishnah. He wants to tithe from one barrel onto the other barrel. So let's see what's going on. Beit Shammai Omrim mifatech or the gut. So if he wants to tithe from one on the others, he would have to open the lid up. He would already put the lid on and pour it back into the gat, the lower receptacle in the wine press. He can just open the lids, and then he can take truma and Maaser back and forth from all the barrels. He doesn't have to pour them back in, mix them back together. But when does this rule apply? This is going back on the prior Mishnah also. But makom shedarkan limkor stumot, in a place where their custom is they sell closed barrels. If they sell the containers, the barrels, the jugs of wine with the lid on, then the container could be bottle to Maaser Sheni. So you go to Yerushalayim, you take out your shekel, and you buy a jug of wine, then it comes with the container. In a sense, the container is bottle to the wine within it, and the container has Kedusha Maaser Sheni. Aval b'makom shedarkan limkor ptucho, but where they sell it in an open container, lo yatsa kankan lechulin. In other words, normally they would just open a barrel of wine and, scoop out a cup and sell you a cup of wine with your Maaser Sheni money. Beautiful. But if he goes ahead and buys the whole jug or the whole barrel, gewaldig, but since he's buying the whole barrel of Maaser Sheni wine in a place where they normally don't sell the whole sealed barrel, then that barrel is also, he's buying the barrel with his Maaser Sheni money, and it takes on the Kedushas Maaser Sheni. The Mishnah gives an exception of volim limkor b'mida. If he wants to be precise here, he wants to be careful and sell it by measure. So they'd open the container and scoop out a jug out of the barrel or a cup out of the jug. Yatzakan kan lechulin. So they're not using the jug to serve the Maaser Sheni. They're just opening it up and scooping out the wine and drinking it. Even one who says to his fellow, Yain ze ani mocher lecha, I'm selling you the wine, chutz mikankana, not its container, yatsa kankan lechulin. So the container doesn't get sanctity of Maaser Sheni. So he goes and he takes a shekel and he buys the jug of wine, but the seller says, listen, I'm selling you the wine, not the container. So the container is not affected by the purchase and has no kedusha.